So here's a topic that might resonate with visitors. If you've ever been to Boston's North End on a Saturday or Sunday, you might hear cascading bells echoing throughout the neighborhood. Those are Old North's change-ringing bells. This is a specialized style of ringing using particular patterns rather than playing a song. That's what gives them that cascading, flowing sound. And there are actually a couple of persistent legends about these bells, so let's start by dispelling those, and along the way we can learn a lot of their true history in the process. Legend number 1. Despite some big claims on the internet and elsewhere, these were not the, quote, first bells in America. Even just within the British Empire, there are plenty of records of bells that predate ours. And Spanish and French territories in the Americas had bells very early on. This legend does stem from a seed of truth, at least, in that these were the first set, or what they call peal, of change-ringing bells, so the first of that particular type of bells in North America. So, still impressive. It's just much more nuanced than Old North simply being first. Legend number 2, which is the common belief that Paul Revere cast these bells. That sure would be an excellent story, but unfortunately it can't be true. Ours were cast in 1744, meaning Revere would have been 9 years old. He was a precocious kid, but maybe not that precocious. In fact, they were cast in England by a man named Abel Ruddle. He even inscribed his name on one of the bells. But there is a connection to Revere. To explain this, let's go back to when the bells arrived. So they were cast in England in 1744 by Ruddle. By 1745, they arrived in Boston, and Old North had 8 brand new change-ringing bells, but no regular ringers for them. Nobody in Boston was practiced in the change-ringing style, which takes a full team and very precise timing to do. So, despite having 8 bells, only 1 or 2 were told at a time just for special occasions. Eventually, 5 years later, some North End teenagers, or so the story goes, formed a bell-ringing guild. They offered their services to the church, and in 1750, change ringing was finally taking place at Old North. This guild wrote a contract with a minister, and amongst the signatures, one particular name should ring a bell, pun intended, and that's Paul Revere, a 15-year-old Paul Revere at this time. So Revere didn't make the bells, but was one of the first bell ringers at Old North. He wasn't a member of the church here, but was apparently fascinated by what must have seemed to him like these fancy new gadgets from England. By exploring and debunking these legends, we've learned quite a bit. What else can we say about their history, though? For one, like many things at Old North, the bells were paid for by subscription or individual donations, a topic that's very complicated, so we've included a separate discussion about it in a link in the description where we have more facts and stories. But they were purchased for 560 British pounds, a hefty sum back then. Between the prestige of cascading bells, a unique sound in colonial America, and the tall steeple, Old North was essentially designed to show off privilege and prestige. Also interesting, each bell has an inscription by Ruddle, and it's written in the first person. For example, bell number 8 says, "Abel Ruddle of Gloucester cast us all," I guess as a little self-promotion. Bell number 7 is the most interesting, as it states, quote, "Since generosity has opened our mouths, our tongues shall ring aloud its praise." Again, that generosity is quite complicated, but the idea was that a bell speaks its inscription each time it strikes. Now, a bit of a random story, but getting the bells to Boston seemed to have been a bit problematic. A man named John Baker was supposed to accompany the bells across the ocean and help set them up. But at the last minute, Baker basically said he totally wanted to go, but that his wife wouldn't let him, and that she supposedly fainted at the very thought of such a dangerous trip. So Ruddle sent written instructions and a model for Old North's congregation to mimic as best as they could. I don't mean to mock, I can't even look at a ship without getting seasick, but maybe don't throw the wife under the bus as a reason why. There also remain quite a few mysteries. We don't really know how they got the bells up in the tower, especially considering the lightest bell is about 620 pounds and the heaviest weighs 1,545. Also, beyond Paul Revere, we don't know much about most of that first guild of bell ringers. We don't know how often actual change ringing took place at Old North either. It seemed to be pretty infrequent. We don't know how long that first guild lasted, or if others took their place after. By the 1800s, the bell mechanism had been altered so that the bells could be simply struck or chimed by one individual. In 1894, change ringing briefly resumed with a new guild, but after only a year, they too disbanded. On the whole, it seems that actual change ringing, with a full team of 8 doing the complicated patterns, was relatively rare at Old North. By the mid-1900s, change ringing hadn't taken place here for decades, but a major restoration took place in the 1970s and 80s. The wooden wheels were replaced, the bells were restored, and a volunteer guild formed and offered to ring the bells every Saturday and Sunday. This organization still rings the bells today. If you ever hear the bells, that's them. So once again, we have actual change ringing at Old North. So one of the most interesting things is that when you hear the bells of Old North today, it is a relatively rare event throughout the church's 300-year history, and that adds something special to the experience now. Long into the future, if the church ever struggled to find bell ringers again, visitors could look back at this time with nostalgia, wondering how the bells must have sounded ringing their precise patterns throughout the North End. At least as far as the bells are concerned, our present time is, historically, a noteworthy era.